All right. Let's make a start. The replays are on, so people who join later can catch up on replays. Um, thank you, Mahesh, once again. I've been getting feedback from various people, and everybody is very grateful to what you've been doing for the last 4 weeks, taking us through Savitri. So this is the fifth such session. We started 4 weeks ago, rather nearly a month ago, talking about Savitri, which kind of has now become a series of a reading, a little bit of reading, and beautiful explanation. So we covered the book of beginnings, and then in the last session we did the book of love, and today we're going to be covering the book of death, which I'm particularly eagerly looking forward to. And Mahesh, you've been kindly captaining us through this voyage into Savitri. So, without further ado, then I'll hand over to you, Mahesh, to take us through Book of Death today.
Yeah, thank you.
And as usual, whenever you find the logical pause, you can stop and we can open for discussion and see how it goes. And we will try to keep it to your 10:30, your last filter coffee time. So
Thank you.
uh, I'll try to moderate in such a way that we wind up before 10:30 India time. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good,
So
Hemant.
over to you, Mahesh. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Hemant. Uh, again, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Uh, Today's session as I was preparing, uh, going through Savitri, specifically the death chapters, it was a sort of tricky exercise, so to speak. Tricky because one, I mean, the poetry is profound. There is much that is being covered. So when I say there is much being covered, it's not just the aspects of the plot that Sri Aurobindo is sort of detailing. It is also the mechanisms, the mechanics of death. What happens when a person dies, and rather than a lay human being watching the process unfold, how is it different when someone as adept and competent, like Savitri, spiritually competent? How does a spiritual person, accomplished person like Savitri look at that phenomena? So, because he renders this entire experience of this dialogue with death, or even the process of seeing Satyavan die, Sri Aurobindo is sort of detailing from multiple levels. So when I say multiple levels, it's the human level, it's the very neutral sort of witness level. From multiple levels, he's sort of looking at this phenomena, what it means, and so on, right? Now, um, I was mentioning to Hemant yesterday evening, as I was contemplating this, for a moment, I could, I was sort of thrown into that poise into a inner poise of looking at Savitri, that tremendous presence. And it was an intensely moving experience. In fact, I was having my usual evening coffee. It's a place full of traffic and noise and whatnot, but it just sucked me in. And I could also sort of feel the presence of Sri Aurobindo behind that aura of Savitri, which I could feel. It just nearly moved me to tears. Uh, so, so before we begin touching Savitri's, the Book of Death portions, I would like to take a little detour, related, but very useful detour on why Savitri by Sri Aurobindo is so distinctive in the way it approaches the question of death, right? So, just for context, death is not, death is probably one of those, not one, the most, I think it's the most uh, primary phenomenon of life, just like birth. But birth is not something that we consciously choose. Events are have been organized, and we just happen to be born. But death is something that we experience, and death always is a shocker, to put it mildly. So, for those of you who know the Buddhist path, Buddha's observation of this phenomena of death, the fact that a person who was there has suddenly just disappeared, it's gone, and his subsequent quest, uh, to find a solution for death, so to speak, and life, painful life. So that is one sort of, very important milestone in the whole spiritual adventure. That is the Buddhas. But way before the Buddha, there have been other adventures also, because death is a phenomena that all of us are familiar with, and all of us experience that same pain, right? The pain of a loved one disappearing and so on. But remember, this is not a very, death, the pain that results from death is not a very uniquely human experience, because even animals grieve. You know, especially with YouTube around, I'm sure all of us have seen videos where, once the mate dies, more intensely, more consciously in some species than others. But we always find that grief, in animals, that grief is sort of contained. It's not articulated. They can sing no poetry or anything like that, right? They cannot record their anguish. But in humans, that ability to record your pain, to record what you have done, how you grappled with that question of death, is something that has occurred many, many times, and people have left records. So I would like to point to Kathopanishad as a very nice example of this question of dealing with death, this process of dealing with death, but not from a strictly Vedic standpoint, because by the time you reach the Upanishadic period, like we mentioned long back, in one of our earlier sessions, you're already, it's the late Vedic period, it's the late Vedic period. So the way the Upanishad confronts some of these questions of what is the purpose of life, what is death, is distinctly different. So uh, uh, I'd like you to sort of bear that in mind, and as a what do you say, again, for those of you who are not familiar with the Kathopanishad, I thought I'll just read out, just quickly, just a few sentences uh, from the Kathopanishad. So for those of you, again, who are not familiar, the context is something like this. There is this young lad, Nachiketa, that's his name. And Nachiketa watches his father perform sacrifices, the Vedic yajna, right? Now remember, this is the late Vedic period, so the purpose of the yajna, the method of it is already forgotten. Now it's a mere ritual which you do to attain some supposed ends, right? We are at that stage right now. So Nachiketa observes his father perform this rite, and he also observes that his father is giving away. You're supposed to, what do you say, share your wealth or donate your wealth, post the sacrifice, right? Post the yajna, you're supposed to donate, do dana, right? So what this guy is doing, that is Nachiketa's father, what he does, he's donating his wealth, but he's doing it in a sort of sneaky manner. Now, what is this sneaky manner? He's giving off all his old cows that have, aged, that don't milk anymore. So he's sort of giving these useless gifts away, right? Uh, Now, Nachiketa is a smart lad. He observes. He understands that there's something deeply hypocritical that's happening, and he's not happy about it. Right. So he goes to his father and says, Father, you're sacrificing all this. To whom are you going to sacrifice me? Right. That's a very rude question, but that's how he poses it. He's saying, whom are you going to give me to? Right. And once he asks, twice he asks, and the third time he asks, the father snaps. He snaps, and just like any common Hindu parent who would have gotten annoyed and said, go die, or I give you, get lost or something like that, right? Similarly, Nachiketa's father says, I give you to death. He says, I give you to death, and then Nachiketa goes through this process. But I'll just read out some of these passages where Yama or the Lord of Death is talking to Nachiketa, and I want you to observe the type of knowledge and the extent of knowledge of the phenomena of death that was uh, uh, aware to the person who wrote the Katha Upanishad or to the Rishi who wrote the Upanishad. What's the state of knowledge at that particular point in time in the evolution of Hindu spirituality, or however you want to call it, right? So this is from Kena and the other Upanishads. This is the second book of the Upanishads that Sri Aurobindo has written. So I'm going to read from the Kathopanishad section, and this is verse number 20 on page 105. Yama says, "This debate that there is over the man who has passed, and some say this he is not, and some that he is, that taught by thee I would know, this is the third boon of the boons of my choosing." No, sorry, this is Nachiketa. He's sort of putting this question to Yama, saying, when a person dies, he says there is a conversation that's floating around that says, was he there? Was the person there? But some say, the person is no longer there, and you will find this in even in common language, right? Even though the body is there, we invariably say he has passed, he or she has passed. It's gone. Something is gone, but the material evidence is still sitting there, right? Though not animated, but nevertheless, it's as if the person is sleeping and it's there. The person is there, but still we use that language. So Nachiketa says this, and Yama's response, "Even by the gods was this debated of old, for it is not easy of knowledge, since very subtle is the law of it. Another boon choose, O Nachiketas. Importune me not, nor urge me. This abandon." So it goes on, right? So the central point, is he there, is he not there? That's what I wanted to highlight. Again, this is a beautiful Upanishad on its own, uh, very mystic, very profound. I would, highly, I would really, urge all of you to, to find this particular book of Sri Aurobindo and sort of pursue that independently. Now we'll come to Savitri. So let me pick the book. So today, like Hemant said, we are going to deal with some of the sections that deal with Savitri and Yama death. So the book is called the Book of Eternal Night, Book 9, Book of Eternal Night. This particular chapter is called Towards the Black Void. Now, in one of our just the book prior to this one, just the section prior to this one, was the very first random passage that we had read in our first session on Savitri, where Sri Aurobindo is describing the process by which Savitri is sort of, looking at the dead portion and she's sort of rising up, right? That's this is the prior section to that, right? So, Towards the Black Void, this is Canto 1, I think page number is 571. So was she left alone in the huge wood, surrounded by a dim, unthinking world, her husband's corpse on her forsaken breast. In her vast, silent spirit motionless, she measured not her loss with helpless thoughts, nor rent with tears the marble seals of pain. She rose not yet to face the dreadful God. Now, you see what Sri Aurobindo is doing here, right? Now he's contrasting the typical response when we, as a common human person, right? If you have not sort of trod the path of yoga, you typically are swept up by the waves of grief and the sense of loss and suffering and all of that. It's an intensely painful experience, to see someone close to you pass away, right? Now, the way she, that's us, as in, common people, lay people. But look at Savitri's response. She measured not her loss with helpless thoughts, nor rent with tears the marble seals of pain. So it's not as if she's not it's not as if she is not experiencing pain. She is experiencing pain, right? So, but she's not, what do you say? She's not pouring tears out. She's not pouring tears out, and she's not, her grief. She's not. What do you say? She's not pouring it out in helpless thoughts, because all the thoughts. I mean, this is a very crucial distinction, right? When a common person grieves, all the thoughts, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. All of these are helpless thoughts, because eventually you can't do anything. Because why? You don't have the power. You don't have the spiritual power to do anything about it, and hence your grief. And how much ever you churn your mind and heart and whatnot, eventually it's useless, right? But Savitri is different, and that's why he says she measured not her loss with helpless thoughts. Over the body she loved, her soul leaned out in a great stillness, without stir or voice, as if her mind had died with Satyavan. Again, there's the psychological breakdown, right? So Sri Aurobindo is saying, she's a yogin in her own right, Savitri. So she's not in some helpless poise, but at the same time, he's documenting the fact that the mind has died down. Her mind is silent. Everything is, there is a hush, right? Again, for those of you who have sort of experienced some level of stillness in the process of meditation, or absorbed in an idea or a thought, you know this hush, the mental hush, right? Nothing stirs. It's like a empty room in your head, right? So that's what he's documenting. As if her mind had died with Satyavan, but still the human heart in her beat on. Aware still of his being near to hers, closely she clasped to her the mute, lifeless form, as though to guard the oneness they had been, and keep the spirit still within its frame. So, again, the psychological breakdown, right? So she's holding Satyavan's body and she's hugging it, and Sri Aurobindo is saying, as if, by her hug, she could sort of, compress the spirit in the body, ensure that it sort of remains there. Then suddenly there came on her the change, which in tremendous moments of our lives can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. Now, important passage, because there's a transition that he's describing. So he Sri Aurobindo said, okay, Savitri is holding Satyavan's body. She's holding it close, but then there's a shift. The scene sort of shifts inside, right? And this transition, there's a beautiful transition, right? Then suddenly there came on her the change, which in tremendous moments of our lives can overtake sometimes the human soul and hold it up towards its luminous source. So the event, there is something unfolding. There is an event that is unfolding within, and he says it happens in some important moments of our lives, right? Now, again, for those of you who are familiar with Sri Aurobindo's life story or whatever, right? Uh, Life story, you will know that our man has had this has had spiritual experiences sort of sweep into him in the waking state. In the waking state, he's just swept up, and some of this transition that is describing, the authenticity comes from that first-hand experience. So it's not a poetic trick or him arranging the scene in a certain way, right? Though he is arranging the scene in a certain way, but the experience that he is alluding to is a lived, authentic experience. Something could have happened to a lot of listeners out here. And hold it up towards its luminous source. The veil is torn. The thinker is no more. Only the spirit sees, and all is known. So, the typical I mean, you look at what he's doing, right? He says the veil is torn, the thinker is no more, the mind is gone. Now, there are gradations of silence of the mind, right? There are gradations of silence, and there is a level at which the agency within the mind is itself dead. It's gone, and that's the level that he's sort of moving to. The thinker is no more, only the spirit sees, and all is known. Then a calm power seated above our brows is seen, unshaken by our thoughts and deeds. Its stillness bears the voices of the world. Now watch what he's doing. Then a calm power, power with a capital P, seated above our brows, right? Now, now he's sort of referring, the seated above your brow is nothing but the chakra at that particular point, that third eye region, right? That's the sort of witness will, the will sort of is seated there, right? Now, this is not the thousand petal lotus chakra which is above your head. It's not that one he's referring to. This one is, the yogic phenomena. Most of it, once it's initiated, it's that spot which gets triggered. It's that chakra which gets activated. Then a calm power seated between our brows is seen, unshaken by our thoughts and deeds. Unshaken. Why? Because it's a witness principle. It's the silent Ishvara who's just sort of watching all of it, right? He's not moved. He's not moved by the thoughts and deeds. Its stillness bears the voices of the world. Immobile, it moves nature, looks on life. It shapes immutably its far seen ends. Again, for those of you who are familiar with the Purusha Prakriti aspect, Purusha is the masculine principle which is passive, but it is the Lord, and Prakriti, which is the active principle, which is nature. You can call it yin and yang, however you want to phrase it, right? But we will use Purusha Prakriti because its symbolism is sort of detailed very, very, you know, uh, minutely and to a very there's lots of corpus of data that's available. So we'll stick to the Purusha Prakriti split, and that's why he says immobile, it moves nature. The Purusha is silent, it's the witness, right? But it is the one I mean, he's the one who's sort of moving nature with a capital N. So that is Prakriti, right? Uh, it shapes immutably its far-seen ends. Why? There's another portion in the Upanishads where you will see the will being described as the Ishvara. So they'll say the will is Lord. Why is the will? This is not the human will which is swayed by desires and things, right? This is a luminous will, a capital W, a will. That will is Lord because it's omniscient, omnipotent, and so on. And that's why he says, Sri Aurobindo says, it shapes immutably its far-seen ends. The goal that it has in mind, which is far, far away, it shapes it immutably, unerringly. It knows what to do, and it has the knowledge and the light and the power to make it happen. Okay. Untouched and tranquil amid error and tears, and measureless above our striving wills, its gaze controls the turbulent whirl of things. Again, it's a silent, omniscient will, right? And again, he says, untouched and tranquil amid error and tears. That's our error and our tears, right? And measureless above our striving wills. You see, that's a distinction we make, right? Our will, the common human will, is full of desires, error, suffering. It's moved by all of these things, and hence it's ineffective in a way. If you look at it in one perspective, its gaze controls the turbulent whirl of things. To mate with the glory it sees, the spirit grows. The voice of life is tuned to infinite sounds, and he goes on. Sri Aurobindo goes on to describe. Now I'll take a sort of small break here. Again, you need to read this entire passage, but let me just shift the scene a little bit. Again, it's from the same book. We're just going a little ahead because there's much I want to cover. I don't think we'll be able to cover all that we want to cover in one session, but we'll see how it expands, right? So, 1 second. Let me just move here. All in Her. This is page 573. Again, the same book, the Book of Eternal Night. Canto is the same canto. towards the black void, and the page number is 573. All in her mated with that mighty hour, as if the last remnant had been slain by death of the humanity that was once hers, assuming a spiritual wide control, making life see a mirror of heaven's sky, the young divinity in her earthly limbs filled with celestial strength her mortal part. Over was the haunted pain, the rending fear. Her grief had passed away, her mind was still, her heart beat quietly with a sovereign force. There came a freedom from the heartstrings' clutch. Now all her acts sprang from a goddess calm. Again, the distinction that he is making between a common human action, a common human heart that looks at the death of a near one, and how an adept in yoga like Savitri, how theirs differs, and that's why he says her grief had passed away, her mind was still, her heart beat quietly with a sovereign force. There came a freedom from the heartstrings clutch. So the heart is, it's as if it's being strung up by these emotions, right? That sweep through you, and all of it has been broken. They've been sundered, right? And she feels that freedom, right? Now all her acts sprang from a goddess calm. Calmly she laid upon the forest soil the dead who still reposed upon her breast, and bore to turn away from the dead form. So she Savitri is sort of putting Satyavan's body on the soil, and sort of she's trying to turn and see, right? Because she knows, because already in an earlier passage, Sri Aurobindo has already indicated she feels that there is another presence there. As Satyavan dies, she feels that presence, and obviously another presence is of death, Yama. So now she rose to meet the dreadful god. That mightier spirit turned its mastering gaze on life and things, inheritor of a work left to it unfinished from a halting past, when at the mind a passionate learner toiled and ill-shaped instruments were crudely moved. Now, this is a beautiful hint, right? Beautiful hint because, see, what Shriramanga was saying is she rose now, alone. She's all alone now because Satyavan is gone. She's rising alone to meet the dreadful God. She's rising to meet death. Now, he's saying that mightier spirit turned its mastering gaze on life and things. So, somewhere, not only is she turning to look at death, but she's turning to look at all of this event and its context and nature and the whole problem of existence. Her gaze is not just turning to death, it's turning upon everything. And look at this very important line: inheritor of a work left to it unfinished from her halting past. So he says, this is not as if Savitri is confronting this problem for the first time. She has presumably done this many, many times. She has confronted this problem. And because this problem was unfinished, she didn't solve it before, right? Why didn't she solve it before? Because when at the mind, a passionate learner toiled, and ill shaped instruments were crudely moved. So Sri Aurobindo is saying that, Savitri in her previous lives has attempted to tackle death, but why wasn't she successful? Because, she was still learning. She has not mastered anything, right? And all the instruments that were given to her, which is her own being and mind and heart and whatnot, they were ill-shaped instruments, were crudely moved. So he says that's why, uh, this work had to be begun again. It had to be continued, right? And watch the very next line. So he's sort of emphasizing this. Transcended now was the poor human rule. So, he's making that clear distinction. All the attempts that she has presumably done up until then were human attempts, right? On confronting this problem. But now that she has sort of, come to this goddess calm, the action that is to come is not within the limits of the human capacity. She has sort of exceeded that. A sovereign power was there, a godlike will. A moment yet she lingered motionless and looked down on the dead man at her feet. Now watch the scene, right? Imagine the scene in your mind's eye. Try to imagine this. So she stood up, right? She has already laid the body of Satyavan on the ground, and she's standing up right there, and at her feet is Satyavan's body. And there is a beautiful symbolism here, right? Beautiful symbolism, because for those of you who are familiar with Kali worship, I'd like you to sort of recollect, this very famous iconography of Kali dancing on the prone body of Shiva, right? Uh, Now that's, it's a very popular tantric sort of imagery and symbol, because Kali is the Shakti, the active principle that's dominating, and Shiva is the passive principle. But the way Tantra portrays it, it portrays it very beautifully, because it's the prone body of Shiva. It's as if he's dead. Now, if you look at it from a Vedantic perspective, because he's meditating, he's self-absorbed, he's not actively putting out himself. He's sort of indrawn entirely, and it's on his prone chest that Kali is dancing. So there's something similar happening here. We are not coming to that mastering movement, but the the line, right? And looked down on the dead man at her feet. Then, like a tree recovering from a wind, she raised her noble head. Uh, Again, beautiful, glorious poetry, right? So imagine a hurricane or something, all the trees are all stooping, their heads are down, the crown is down, the head is down. And once the hurricane has passed, the tree goes back to its erect state, right? So the mere act of her rising up, looking down at the body and lifting her head, Sri Aurobindo is saying it's as if the tree, after the wind is gone, is sort of lifting its gaze, right? She raised her noble head. Fronting her gaze, something stood there, unearthly, somber, grand, a limitless denial of being that wore the terror and wonder of a shape. Again, the description of death that you see in most, let's say, the Puranic renditions of death, right? They'll show one Puranic, or even in especially in popular culture, they'll show one black pot-bellied fellow sitting on a buffalo, very garish sort of image. But if you look at the way Sri Aurobindo is rendering death, he comes across more as a very sophisticated sway villain, right? Universal power, of course, but fronting her gaze, something stood there, unearthly, somber, grand, a limitless denial of being that wore the terror and wonder of a shape. That shape is both a terror and a wonder. It is formidable to see. Again, for those of you who are familiar with the Gita, when Arjuna has the vision of the universal form, Arjuna's first reaction is fear. One of the reactions, important reactions, is fear. He shrinks. He says, "This is too tremendous. This is impossible. I'm seeing everything, and I can't handle it." Right? And that's, I mean, of course, this is not the universal vision. That's a different experience. But when you confront any of the universal powers, I mean, even Kali or any of the mother forms, even at the lowest vital levels, it just shakes our being. We are not able to take it. You feel like a fool because you cry all your life for one experience of her, and when she comes, even in her smallest forms, you're just not able to handle, right? And that's what is sort of happening here. That wore the terror and wonder of a shape, and its appalling eyes, the tenebrous form, bore the deep pity of destroying gods. Look at that, appalling eyes, it bore the deep pity of destroying gods. Now it's almost like an oxymoron, right? We are not typically used to it, destroying gods. Because typically we look at the Ashura, Rakshasa, the demons as the bad ones, but he's talking of destroying gods. There is a God whose purpose is to destroy, right? And they do it from that inevitable knowledge, right? Like necessity, hard, cold necessity. And this is an angle Sri Aurobindo will take in a little while. But both the deep pity of destroying gods, a sorrowful irony curved the dreadful lips that speak the word of doom. Eternal night in the dire beauty of an immortal face, pitying a rose, preceding all that lives forever into its fathomless heart. refuge of creatures from their anguish and world pain. Now look at that. He's saying it's a dreadful God. This dreadful God has pity towards human creatures. Why pity? Because he has to receive everything that lives, has to die someday. And where do they go? They go into death's fathomless heart, forever into its fathomless heart, refuge of creatures from their anguish and world pain. So you look at this perspective, right? So it's all, I mean, if you read death's arguments, you'll feel as if, it's a very compassionate God who's speaking. It's as if Buddha is saying, children, don't get misguided. It's a miserable world. Listen to what I'm saying, right? It feels that benevolent, right? And it is not, what do you say, an emotional argument, right? These are all very well thought out arguments. These are all very crystal clear, very precise, very relatable. So that's why he says, Sri Aurobindo is saying, right, of creatures, a refuge of creatures from their anguish and world pain. His shape was nothingness made real. His limbs were monuments of transience, and beneath brows of unwearying calm, large godlike lids, silent beheld the writhing serpent life. So, again, beautiful imagery. I'm saying life is like a writhing serpent, and it's caught in this coil of death, right? I mean, caught in the limbs of death, and life is suffering, right? and and his limbs were monuments of transience, ephemeral. Things will get destroyed. It's mortal, right? So, uh, uh, silent beheld the writhing serpent life, unmoved. Their timeless, wide, unchanging gaze had seen the unprofitable cycles pass, survived the passing of unnumbered stars, and sheltered still the same immutable orbs. Beautiful description. Because it's a universal God, it's a universal power, it's a typal power, so it is not typically, it doesn't get born and die and whatnot, right? It always is, right? Because it's a universal power. Think of it like gravity, right? There's no single moment where gravity is coming to be. The moment existence happens, gravity has happened. Similarly, death was always there, right? It's in universal God, and that's why he says the same immutable laws. Now, why is he saying same immutable orbs? Because with the same pair of eyes, these this principle, death, has observed the unprofitable cycles pass. The cycles of creation, many cycles have come and gone. So cycles, you can take it for the cycles of life and death and cycles of creation at whatever level of abstraction that you want to take it, right? So, unmoved, their timeless, wide, unchanging gaze had seen the unprofitable cycles pass, survived the passing of unnumbered stars, and sheltered still the same immutable laws, orbs. So this vision, this gaze, this perspective is is not coming to this game with a very premature or negativity, right? Because it has seen. Sri Aurobindo is saying he has seen all the cycles pass, and what sort of cycles? He says unprofitable cycles. Nothing has come out of it. Man still dies. Whether it's 10,000 millennia before or 10,000 millennia after, death will be there. You might live a little longer or a shorter. That's the only difference, but you still die. So, death's argument, death's perspective is that what's the point? You're doing the same damn thing. And and it has seen this for so long. How long is this? The stars have come and gone, many suns have born, and many suns have died, and death has seen all of this, right? I'll skip a few lines and then I'll get to the section. Again, it's in the same section. I'm just skipping 3, 4 lines. Vacant eternity's forbidding hope laid upon her their huge and lifeless look, and to her ears, silencing earthly sounds, a sad and formidable voice arose, which seemed the whole adverse worlds. So suddenly, all the sounds, because remember the scene is still happening in the forest, right? So in a earlier section, Sri Aurobindo will point out how, through the process, she still hears the birds, she still hears those murmurs, and he wants us to sort of pay attention to a couple of things here. Now, he's not just describing the scene, because remember, there's already the spiritual phenomena that's unfolding within her. Her will has gotten activated from within the brows. A witness gaze is sort of looking at the problem, but the body is still active. Or Savitri's body is still active, and that's why it's through its senses it's sort of receiving these signals, right? So, silencing earthly sounds, a sad and formidable voice arose, which seemed the whole adverse worlds. The whole hostile world. It's as if all the hostile worlds, all the hostile voices had sort of joined, and they cancelled out the sounds of nature, whatever is happening outside, and it puts all its lips behind a single voice, so to speak, right? And now death is beginning to speak. Unclasp, it cried, thy passionate influence, and relax, O slave of nature, changing tool of changeless law, who vainly writhest rebellion to my yoke, sorry, thy elemental grasp. Weep and forget, entomb thy passion in its living grave. Leave now the once loved spirit's abandoned robe. Pass lonely back to thy vain life on earth. Now, look at that derision, right? That contempt in its voice. And look at what it's saying. It says, unclasp, release, release your fingers now. Unclasp thy passionate influence and relax. It says, take it easy, right? Leave him. Now, O slave of nature. Now, Death's contempt for Savitri does not come because, she's human, she's merely human, and this and that and whatnot, right? The contempt does not come from there because death knows that man is a slave of nature. Why? Because all your entire existence comes from nature. She has given your body, she has given your mind, everything is hers. So, what is yours? I mean, ideally speaking, the soul is yours, but it is bound, it's dormant, it's passive, it's not yet active. So our death is saying, what the hell are you? You're only a slave of nature. It says changing tool of changeless law. The law of there are these eternal laws. But man is a mutable tool. Today he comes, he does some piece of the work, then he goes off. So he says, changing tool of changeless law, who vainly writhest rebellion to my yoke. He says, don't rebel. Whatever yoke I've put on you, he says, don't rebel, don't waste your time. He says, weep and forget. Now look at that contempt, right? He says, just cry and be done with it. Weep and forget. Entomb thy passion in its living grave. Again, it's a profound psychology. He says, entomb thy passion. He says, put all your grief in your living grave. What is living grave? Savitri's body, her life, her being is the living grave. He says, tomb, just bury it within you. Entomb thy passion in its living grave. Leave now the once loved spirit's abandoned robe. Pass lonely back to thy vain life on earth. So, again, the glorious contempt portrayed, right? It says, just go back, go alone. It ceased, she moved not. So the voice ceased, and she moved not. And it spoke again, lowering its mighty key to human chords. Yet a dread cry behind the uttered sounds, echoing all sadness and immortal scorn, moaned like a hunger of far wandering waves, saying she didn't respond to whatever, to this point of contempt that Death was throwing at Savitri. Savitri didn't respond. So the voice speaks back again. And how does it speak back? He says, "At a dread cry behind the uttered sounds." And he says, death lowering its mighty key to human gods. So, somewhere it the if you think of it as a wavelength, right? Somewhere death was speaking from a sort of higher register. So now it's sort of stooping and coming down so that it's more human, more understandable to her, or to say that, it's coming into the human wavelength. So, death is sort of stooping down a little, but still that was a dreadful cry, right? It's a dread cry behind the uttered sounds. And how was that sound? Echoing all sadness and immortal scorn. Again, that derision, that contempt, immortal scorn. It's not even a human mortal scorn, right? That scorn, it's unbearable. Immortals gone, moaned like a hunger of far wandering waves. Wilt thou forever keep thy passionate hold, thyself a creature doomed like him to pass, denying his soul death's calm and silent rest? So Death is asking a question. Says, why are you holding to her? Will you keep the hold of your passion forever? Yeah, but you yourself are a creature doomed like him to pass. Even you will die. So why are you holding on? He says, relax thy grasp. This body is earth's and thine. His spirit now belongs to a greater power. Human, thy husband suffers. Uh, Look at that. He says, will you hold him forever? You who are mortal yourself, even you will die one day. So why are you holding on to him? And he says, besides, this body is thine and earth. That you can keep. The dead body of Satyavan is earth's and thine. It's, earth will receive the body, but the guy, you love the guy, and hence the body belongs to you also. Both of you must keep it, earth and Savitri. He, he says, relax thy grasp. Now, again, he's pointing to something very specific here, right? He says, woman, thy husband suffers. Now, ask yourself this question. Why is Sri Aurobindo saying this, right? Woman, thy husband suffers. How will Satyavan suffer now? Because he's dead. He's already dead. But death is making this very clear point, right? He says, don't hold with your passion that being. It's as if passion is a tangible thing. Again, Sri Aurobindo is referring to occult process. That's why you will notice mother from the Sri Aurobindo ashram. She makes this point, right? The best way to let someone pass is to have a calm equality, because it's in calmness that the soul can sort of find its passage through the intermediate realms to go wherever it has to go by its karmic trend and whatnot, right? So the more the number of people around who are wailing, crying, disturbed, it sort of holds the soul back, because there is this you know vital passion, or all the passions, they are like little cards that are binding the being below, right? And that's the reason why Sri Aurobindo is saying, that, or rather, death, through the voice of death, Sri Aurobindo is saying, woman, thy husband suffers. She says, he's saying, let him go, because you're holding him back. He can't go on to wherever he has to go, right? So, uh, again, if you notice, right, it's Sri Aurobindo suffuses everything with a crystal clear description of the psychology and the mechanics of any phenomena that he is talking about. So, uh, I'll just skip a few more lines. Let me just go to uh, now section. Again, same canto, same book, everything is same. I'm just skipping a few lines because I want you to see, I want you guys to sort of experience this thing from Death's perspective, right? Also, right? There's much to cover, but this particular portion is very important. Then Death, the king, leaned boundless down. So Death was standing there all along, right? Now he's sort of leaning down, right? As leans night over tired lands, when evening pales and fading gleams break down the horizon's walls. Now at the dusk grows mystic with the moon. The dim and awful Godhead rose erect from his brief stooping to his touch on earth, and, like a dream that wakes out of a dream, forsaking the poor mould of that dead clay, another luminous Satyavan arose, starting upright from the recumbent earth, as if someone over viewless borders stepped, emerging on the edge of unseen worlds. Watch what happens. So, Sri Aurobindo is describing the moment when death, he leans down and he's standing back erect. So it's as if, he is sort of stooped, bent a little bit, and then he comes back. But what has happened in that time? you know from his brief stooping to his touch on earth, and like a dream that wakes out of a dream. I do not know how many of you have experienced this dream within a dream, right? Again, the moment you have started yoga, all of this will become a normal phenomena, which indicates that you have sort of gone many levels deeper in your gone deeper or higher, based on how where you are. in your consciousness, like a dream that wakes out of a dream. Forsaking the poor mold of that dead clay, another luminous Satyavan arose. So, what he has done, what death has basically done in that moment of stooping, right? He stooped and he has severed, he has culled, right? So he has harvested another soul. So he has cut it and he has released it. Now that luminous body is sort of waking up from that dead Satyavan. Now this is a luminous Satyavan, though. You know, uh, in the earth's day, the silent marvel stood between the mortal woman and the god. So this luminous Satyavan, right? The silent marvel, right? He's standing between Savitri and Yama. Such seemed he, as if one departed came wearing the light of a celestial shape, splendidly alien to the mortal air. So he says it's not as if this guy was on earth at all. It's as if he has come from elsewhere. He has come from some heavenly place. Because that luminous form, the inner being, right? The subtle being, that's what he's portraying. Uh, uh, because it's luminous, it's bright, it's like a marvel. And that is sort of standing in between them. Uh, uh, Now I'll take a that was one I wanted to read. Now I'll take a little pause and move to this particular section. Again, it's in the same book and canto and so on. Silence, battle with silence, vast with vast. So, whose silence? Now, Savitri is also silent, Death is also silent, and these are immense presences, right? Because Savitri, though she is wearing a mortal robe, she's a woman, a normal, woman supposedly, but she has sort of begun this battle mood, right? She has sort of entered that frame already. So she's not a walkover. Death can't just push her around, right? Though he's making his arguments, she has her own power too, right? Which we will see later. That's why he says, silence, battle with silence, vast with vast. But now the impulse of the path was felt, path with a capital P. But now the impulse of the path was felt, moving from the silence that supports the stars to touch the confines of the visible world. It's as if, there is a path, there's a secret, there's an occult path which is sort of drawing everything. So, that has sort of entered the scene. So, all along, our protagonists, right? You have the dead Satyavan, you have the mortal woman Savitri, and the god, the Yama, the god, right? All three were there. But now it's as if, a little portal has opened up. The path is sort of manifested out of nowhere, right? So to speak. And it is drawing them, right? Luminous, he moved away. Behind him, death went slowly with his noiseless tread. As seen in dream-built fields, a shadowy herdsman glides behind some wanderer from his voiceless herds. And Savitri moved behind eternal death. Her mortal pace was equaled with the gods. So the moment the path appeared, what happened? This luminous form of Satyavan, it sort of it knows. The inner being knows what path to take. So the moment the path appeared, it's sort of going, and death is behind, and behind death is Savitri. Now, see this beautiful sequence, right? So Satyavan is ahead, death is behind, but Savitri is also there. Savitri is following death, right? Uh, uh, Her mortal pace was equal with the gods. So, in whatever speed, symbolic speed, right? Because this is not speaking of a material realm. We have already entered the grounds of subtler grounds. We have entered other domains of consciousness. So, but look at these next two lines, right? Wordless, she traveled in her lover's steps, planting her human feet where his had trod into the perilous silences beyond. Oh, watch this beauty. Now remember, Satyavan is first, death is second, but somehow she knows where his steps have fallen, where his feet have fallen. And Sri Aurobindo is saying Savitri puts her feet exactly there. You know, take it as what you want, right? It's that fondness, it's that love. Anything of him she wants to be in touch with. right? It doesn't matter what. It's the dead form which is leaving a sort of footprint behind, and even that is acceptable to her. And look at this beautiful framing, right? I find it beautiful because even though at some level she's able to look at Satyavan, there is also death obscuring, right? Death is sort of, the guy is already, veiled by death's body, so to speak, right? But yet, there is some trace she's able to hold on to, catch it, and she pursues it, right? So, and into the perilous silences beyond. So, again, I'll move a few sections and go to another place. Okay, I'm skipping around 100 odd lines and get to this particular point. Now, remember, uh, the fact that she's able to perceive footsteps, tracks, so her body is still in action. Her external body, her most externalized material sheath, is still in action, right? So she's still able to sort of see with her slightly divinized, slightly yogic sight. She's able to see death in Satyavan and everybody, but still it's predominantly the physical body at play, right? And now watch the transition, how Sri Aurobindo is sort of describing this transition. Yeah, one second. Into a deep and unfamiliar air, enormous, windless, without stir or sound, they seem to enlarge away, drawn by some wide pale distance from the warm control of earth and her grown far. So he says, as they are moving, they seem to either expand or they're sort of enlarging in some way. It's all almost as if he's describing the gross form with which they had come, because it's not a material form, right? It's already a some sort of a vision that's sort of happening, but even that is getting subtilized. It's becoming more finer, and it's sort of going away, right? And going away from where? He says going away from the warm control of the earth and her. It's already going far, and the body is already dead. Satyavan's luminous form and the form of death, both are going away from Earth's control. They are going away from this hemisphere, and hence they are neither in Earth's control nor her control. As in, when Sri Aurobindo is speaking of control here, as in at least to be able to hold the person within your gaze is a sort of control, right? That's what he's alluding to, right? And her. Now they would escape. Well, it's becoming more subtle. They're sort of disappearing. So there is that urgency, right? There is that fear. It says, now they would escape. Then, flaming from her body's nest, alarmed, her violent spirit soared at Satyavan. Look at that sentence. She is still within her body. Remember, she's walking, right? Now, the fact that Satyavan might disappear any time and she may not be able to catch, says, or her violent spirit soared at Satyavan, out mid the plunge of heaven surrounded rocks. So, in a terror and wrath divine, from her eyrie streams against the ascending death, indignant at its crouching point of steel, a fierce she eagle threatened in her brood, borne on a rush of puissance and a cry, outwinging like a mass of golden fire. Look at the process. Look at what he's describing now. Now, out of fear that they would escape and she won't be able to, sort of track them, he says, from her eyrie streams against ascending death. So, eyrie is this, eagle nest high on, rocky cliffs, right? It says, indignant at its crouching point of steel, someone is threatening. And how does she react? A fierce she eagle threatened in her brood. Says as if, a mother eagle is sitting on a nest and someone comes and threatens her, and she has her kids to protect, and it's a she eagle, right? A eagle itself is not a pleasant animal to deal with, pleasant bird to deal with, and now on top of it, it's a she eagle. Now on top of it, it's in her nest, and you're threatening her brood with, steel. And how does she react? And she reacts, born on a rush of puissance and a cry, on a rush of strength and a cry. Yeah, I mean, if you were to picturize this, it's such a glorious visualization, right? On a rush of puissance and a cry, outwinging like a mass of golden fire. She's literally exploding. I mean, again, this is like the uprush of Kundalini that happens. Yeah, outwinging like a mass of golden fire. So, on a spirit's flaming outrush borne, she crossed the borders of dividing sense. See what happened now. Look at the transition. He's look how beautifully he's laying out. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like Sri Aurobindo so much, because there is not this hand waving magic. Oh, he died, he went, this, that, whatever, right? Our man has precision. He's exactly telling you what will happen when you get out of the bodily sheath. How does it happen? Says so on a spirit's flaming outrush, born, she crossed the borders of dividing sense. So the spirit that's sort of rising up from her like a mass of golden fire, right? And it has helped her cross the bodily sheath. So she is sort of, the dividing sense, right? Because the sense is the cage, so to speak. Your sense is your body, that's the cage. So she has sort of crossed that. Like pale, discarded sheets dropped dully down, her mortal members fell back from her soul. So, whatever power, this power of the spirit with which she is being borne upwards, it has escaped the mortal sheath. And whatever, not the dull members, the things made of clay and born in that clay, all of that has sort of fallen back, right? Her mortal members fell back from her soul. A moment of a secret body sleep. Her trance knew not of sun or earth or world. Thought, time, and death were absent from her grasp. Now, watch what he's saying. He says her trance. Now, he's told you, right? Whatever is upborn and it's sort of pulled up, it's pulled up, that process is of trance. She's sort of entering into a trance. And what sort of trance is this? Trance so self absorbed, she does not know of earth or sun or the world. Nothing. Everything is gone. Thought, time, and death were absent from her grasp. Nothing she knows. Okay. Now, but watch what he's saying. Right. So at one point he's saying thought, time, and death were absent from her grasp. Her trance is sort of very single-minded, focused. She knew not self. Forgotten was Savitri. How much has she left out? She has left out her own identity. The I she has left out. She knew not self. Forgotten was Savitri. All was the violent ocean of a will, where lived captive to an immense caress, possessed in a supreme identity, her aim, joy, origin, Satyavan alone. Now, look at how beautiful this is. She has forgotten the fact that she is Savitri because, of course, she's in a trance, and her identity has also gone. But what is she? What is she still holding on to? She's still holding on to, possessed in a supreme identity. Now she is, because it's the inward spirit, right? When it wants to feel identity, it doesn't have the disability of the body that you have to go hug someone, be near someone, body to body, because that's how a body expresses intimacy, which is again a very poor intimacy, right? But that's all a body knows. But a spirit knows something much, much more powerful, way supremely powerful, right? And what is that? Possessed in a supreme identity. She's him and he is she. And it's in that capacity that she is possessing. But look at that. Her aim, joy, origin, Satyavan alone. That is all that she's holding on to. Now look at the stature of that love, right? Look at that love. This is a different sort of love. Again, like most human emotions, there are gradations, right? This is again one of those supreme gradations. And you will see in this description, whatever Sri Aurobindo has given, you look at take many of the bhakti traditions, right? Devotional paths, many of the devotional paths. It is often said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was in his moods of identification with Krishna, when he identified with Krishna, people declared, people who were observing him declared that his body used to grow dark. His countenance became like Krishna's. The identity is complete at that level. Now, that's what is happening here. She has forgotten the fact that she is Savitri, but what does she possess in terms of, perfect identification? She possesses the fact that she loves Satyavan. And who is he? Her aim, joy, origin, everything is him, right? He beat there like a rhythmic heart, herself, but different still. One loved, enveloped, clasped, a treasure saved from the collapse of space. Beautiful description. He's within her in terms of identity, but different still. She can distinguish the fact that there is a lover and the loved. That distinction is still there. She can observe it. One loved, enveloped, clasped, a treasure saved from the collapse of space. Around him, nameless, infinite, she surged. Her spirit fulfilled in his spirit, rich with all time, as if love's deathless moment had been found, a pearl within eternity's white shell. Glorious poetry. A pearl within eternity's white shell. Now, who is this eternity? He's stating very clearly that her infinity, because remember, at the spirit level, she is also infinite, right? At the soul level. And it's this, with all this infinity, she is surrounding him. And look at that love, right? And protection, right? She's surrounding him, a pearl within eternity's white shell. Then, out of the engulfing sea of trance, her mind rose, drenched to light, streaming with hues of vision, and awake once more to time. See the clear distinction that he's making. There was a self-absorbed trance where she's able to find her identity with his spirit, possess it, hold like a pearl within eternity shell. She's doing all of that because it's a specific type, level of the trance where this is happening. But then something happens. There's a change in the trance, right? Now, what sort of change in the trance? Change. Her mind rose, drenched to light, streaming with hues of vision, and awake once more to time. So, from that sea of trance in which she was drowned, her mind is sort of coming back again. Now, how is it coming back? He says, drenched to light, streaming with hues of vision. So, somewhere the mind has acquired this capacity once it's sort of coming out from that trance, right? So, at one point, the mind also was absorbed in the trance. Now, in the trance, the mind is sort of coming back into play. But now it's not the normal crying mind. He says it's seeing a lot more things. What sort of things? Light streaming with hues of vision, and awake once more to time, return to shape the lineaments of things and live in borders of the seen and known. So she has sort of entered into a timeless sort of state, right? And then she's sort of coming back into time. The trance has sort of stabilized, so to speak, right? And the mind, in that little stability which was afforded, the mind is coming out, the mind has become luminous, and now it can again begin to see all of things. Because up until now, in that brief moment when she was absorbed in the trance, remember the body has gone out, there is something else, there is probably subtler senses at play, but even they were self-absorbed. All that was gone. Now she is sort of coming back to begin seeing things, right? Uh, one second. Yeah, and he goes on, right? And he goes on. Sri Aurobindo goes on to describe, how she is, how Savitri comes, her mind is back in action, and Savitri is sort of looking at death, and that is when the passage occurs, which we read in our very first session, remember? But death pealed forth his vast abysmal cry, O mortal, turn back to thy transient kind. Now, I'm not going to read it out again because there are other passages that we have to cover, but again, for those of you who remember, it's a beautiful, beautiful passage. Now, with this, when once death stops his argument, and you remember the Kundalini experience of Savitri that I was referring to. So the this particular section ends like this, right? Still, like a statue on its pedestal, lone in the silence, unto vastness bared against midnight's dumb abysses piled in front, a columned shaft of fire and light, she rose. This is, she sort of entered the trance, and the trance is just one episode in the spiritual journey, right? It's not everything, though you can get to all of these heights and so on, but there are still other parts of the being, and that's what is sort of waking up, right? It wakes up, and so when Sri Aurobindo is saying, she rose up again, remember, just like the luminous form arose from Satyavan's dead body, right? There it was happening unconsciously for Satyavan because he didn't do anything. There it was death that culled, the life principle from the body, and Satyavan rose up. That's how it happened there. Now here she's doing it consciously. Now that's a distinction. That's a yogi capacity, right? She's doing it consciously, and she's sort of, risen up from a column, shaft of fire and light. She rose, right? Now we go to the next section. So I want to read out again. It was very difficult for me to literally choose, which particular section to read out for you guys. But I'm going to the next canto, Canto 2. This canto is called "The Journey in Eternal Night and the Voice of the Darkness." Again, the book is the same. The book is Book 9, Book of Eternal Night, and the canto is Canto 2, The Journey in Eternal Night and the Voice of Darkness. So Sri Aurobindo describes, the transition, right? And when I say transition, it's not just the inner occult transition. In addition, he is also describing the sequence and how Savitri is able to follow death. He will describe that process also. So when I say follow death, he has described how her inner being has rose, and he will describe every transition to you step by step. Again, for those of you who are interested in the path of Tantra, who come to it with a sort of scientific mindset, right? And who wish to know all the levers and knobs that go into making you and the spiritual phenomena, highly, highly recommend that you sort of read these sections carefully, because he is just, Sri Aurobindo is just packed with details. Nothing is put there which is not a experienced fact by him. And how do we know? Because even in our process, where even if we are not consciously touching death, there are dream experiences where you pass away, where you leave the body, pass away, you go through the whole, if you're lucky enough, you get the whole rung of experiences. Now, what do I mean by rung of experience? The fact of, leaving the body, becoming immaterial, and merging into some silent absolute, right? You get to experience all of those things. Now, if you have had that experience, when you read this, you know that this man has had 10 times better experience than you, mildly speaking, right? So yeah. So now we get to the section. In this section, Death is going to talk. So let me just read this out. Then a sound pealed through the dead monstrous realm, vast like the surge in a tired swimmer's eyes, clamoring, a fatal iron-hearted roar, death mission to the night, his lethal call. Now, now death is going to talk. This is my silent, dark immensity. This is the home of everlasting night. This is the secrecy of nothingness, entombing the vanity of life's desires. So now they are in a realm, they are in like night proper, right? Now, night as in a capital night. It's not the routine day and night that we experience, right? This is the dark fields, so to speak. If we were to use a Tolkienish language, right? These are the dark fields, and that they are there. They have already sort of entered this domain, and that's why Death is saying, "This is my silent, dark immensity. This is the home of everlasting night. This is the secrecy of nothingness, entombing the vanity of life's desires. Hast thou beheld thy source, O transient heart, and known from what the dream thou art was made?" Look at what he's asking. He says, "You mortal heart, you, O transient heart, hast thou beheld thy source?" Do you know where you come from? And known from what the dream thou art was made. Now look at what he's doing, right? He can't even answer this properly, right? Now, first of all, he's declaring that you yourself are a dream, right? And he says, do you know where your dream, where you, the dream, has come from? Right? In the stark sincerity of nude emptiness, hopest thou still always to last in love? Says, are you really serious? In this, look at this emptiness. He says it's nude emptiness. There's nothing here, right? And he says, do you still want to hope and love? The woman answered not. Her spirit refused the voice of night that knew and death that thought. Look at this beauty. So this is not some dumb popular portrayal of the villain or enemy, whatever you want to call it, right? Ashura, Rakshasa, Satan, or they're always portrayed in pathetic ways. Now look at this. He says this is a voice of night, capital N, capital night, night that knew. Now this is not a dumb night. This night has knowledge, and death that thought. Now look at this, right? It's a typal power, right? It's a universal power, a typal power. Death has always been there, but at the same time, he's saying this is not a plain vanilla villain. This is a knowledgeable villain. Death that can think, and this knight knows it's not a dumb knight, right? Now, here is where I would like to point out in the Veda, in the Rig Veda, uh, the Rishi prays to both the night and day. Now, again, these are not the normal night and day, right? The Vedic Rishi, especially the Rig Vedic Rishi, very specifically prays. He says he calls them the twin mothers. He says the twin mothers suckle the divine child. The night also knows the night is doing something. The night is preparing. Now, we always think the spiritual night is a terrible thing, right? For us, it's, pain, suffering, it's this literally, we tend to fear, right? Because it's the, I don't know, it's the later degradation of the spiritual impulse, right? uh, where you tend to fear these things. But the Vedic Rishi is not doing that. He very clearly says both night and day are essential, and the Vedic Rishi calls them the twin mothers who suckle the divine child. The divine child is the soul, right? The soul needs both. And this is what you will see in another Puranic episode. I think it's in Bhagavatam, I think, where, I mean, it's a very popular episode where the Samudra Mantana, the churning of the cosmic ocean, right? Where when the gods and the demons they are trying to extract Amrita, the ambrosia of immortality, right? They are trying to extract ambrosia, and when the task is set up by the gods, remember the Asuras also play a role and the gods also play a role. Both have to be there. And this is what that Puranic, again, if you overlook some of the, exaggerated, great, vague, imagination busting level sort of tropes that Purana often comes with. But they embed, you will see, if you go to the kernel of this, right, the heart of the Puranic episode, you will find this concordance, a very clear concordance. You need both of them to do the job, right? And and that is why, it's not some lay demon that you will have to, badmouth and things like that, so the voice of night that knew and death that thought. I'll skip a few more lines. But still opposing her with endless night, death, the dire god, inflicted on her eyes the immortal calm of his tremendous gaze. See, the dire God, why is that God dangerous? Inflicted on her eyes the immortal calm of his tremendous gaze. See, there is so much suffering and all of that, right? Now, this is a pitiless God, death. He doesn't care. He's also immortal. He has seen so much. And that calm gaze itself is an affront to a normal human gaze. It's with that gaze that he's sort of holding her, right? And again, death speaks. Although thou hast survived the unborn void, which never shall forgive, while time endures, the primal violence that fashioned thought, forcing the immobile vast to suffer and live, the sorrowful victory only hast thou won to live for a little without Satyavan. He says, what have you got after all this? He says, what have you got? No, he says, you're yet in this unborn void. And he says, "We shall never forgive while time endures." As long as time is alive, Sri Aurobindo is alluding to another fact, right? Another fact, which is, if you ask yourself, all this, to use Sri Aurobindo's terminology, the subconscient and the inconscient, all the negative basis from which everything was born, right? When creation manifested, or rather life sort of arose from this black, dark, dumb foundation, he said, death is saying, no, remember, on the void, this was imposed. The void was there alone, quietly, happily, without being bothered by anything. He says, but they made him suffer, and suffer for what? So that life can live, right? Right. So, that's where that ancient antagonism, right, for all these forces opposing the human endeavor, comes. I mean, if you look at it from one perspective, comes from somewhere there. The sorrowful victory only thou hast won, to live for a little without Satyavan. What shall the ancient goddess give to thee, who helps thy heartbeats? Only she prolongs the nothing dreamed existence, and delays with the labor of living thy eternal sleep. And now, see, death is again, he's aware. He says, what will your ancient goddess give you? Right? She's the one who's helping you, stay alive, even though you are sort of have come out of your body and all of that, right? The body back there is still alive, it's still beating. So he understands all of that. Says, but what's the point? Only she prolongs the nothing dreamed existence, and delays with the labor of living the eternal sleep. Now, it's a beautiful line which all of us who have sort of endured the rough and tumble of life can relate to, right? Which is delays with the labor of living the eternal sleep. Is if you had just lived a little and died, then you have eternal sleep. There's no, this labor of living, because day to day, just to get up and go in the morning, it's a labor. It's a labor, right? Um, a fragile miracle of thinking clay, armed with illusions, walks the child of time. To fill the void around, he feels and dreads the void he came from, and to which he goes. He magnifies his self and names it God. Now, death is sort of approaching. Look at the argument. Formidable argument. He says, you are a fragile miracle of thinking clay. That's all that you are. And armed with illusions walks the child of time. You are only a baby who's born in time, right? Now, but what are you armed with? You are only armed with an illusion. What sort of illusion? He magnifies his self and names it God. Now, this is the atheist argument. Now, again, you will see Sri Aurobindo taking every position the so-called intellectuals, philosophers who have zero idea of spirituality, whatever standpoint that they take, right? He will mention it, of course, not with the name that it typically goes by, and he will demolish it, right? If you're a little patient and sort of follow it, right? Uh, um, so but that's what death is doing right now. He magnifies his self and names it God. He calls the heavens to help his suffering hopes. He sees above him with a longing heart bare spaces more unconscious than himself, that have not even his privilege of mind, and empty of all but their unreal blue, and peoples them with bright and merciful powers. Glorious argument of death. He says, what have you seen so far? He says he sees above him, that is the child, right? Child of time. He sees above him with a longing heart, bare spaces, it's empty spaces, more unconscious than himself, that have not even his privilege of mind. He says, at least you can think, but because you are dumb, you are armed with your illusion that there is something up above. He says, what is this up above? He says, it's an unreal blue. These are bare, empty. There is nothing there. These spaces are more unconscious than you. And at least you have a mind. He says, that's why he says you have a privilege of mind, but that thing has nothing, right? But what does your dreaming mind do? What does your hope do? He says it peoples them with bright and merciful powers. For the sea roars around him, and earth quakes beneath his steps, and fire is at his doors, and death prowls baying through the woods of life. Now, why does he do all of this? Sri Aurobindo is saying because everything is so horrible. right? The earth is quaking beneath your step, right? The seas around you, it can engulf you at any time. There is fire at your door, and death is there, baying and prowling for you through the woods of life. You never know from where death is going to pounce on you. Moved by the presences with a capital P. Moved by the presences with which he yearns, he offers implacable shrines his soul and clothes all with the beauty of his dreams. Shravinda is saying, moved by the presences with which he yearns, he says he offers in implacable shrines. He says in perfect shrines, whether it's a temple, a church, whatever, right? What are you offering? He says, you're offering yourself, your soul, and clothes all with the beauty of his dreams. Now, what you see there is not a living presence. It's only your dream which you have peopled it with. Right? That's what death is saying, by the way, right? The gods who watch the earth with sleepless eyes and guide its giant stumblings through the void have given to man the burden of his mind. In his unwilling heart, they have lit their fires and sown it with incurable unrest. His mind is a hunter upon tracks unknown, amusing upon tracks unknown, right? Now watch what he's doing, and clothes all with the beauty of his dreams. The gods who watch the earth with sleepless eyes and guide its giant stumblings through the void have given to man the burden of his mind. See, the mind is a burden, and look at that trope, right? Because mind is uh, such a rebellious, errant element in the human consciousness, in life, actually. Because as long as the mind is either behind dormant, life is perfectly peaceful, harmonious. For example, take the animal, right? Any animal. It experiences pain, but it does not suffer the way a human suffers. A human suffers because if you when you experience pain, if you leave the body to itself without the mind intervening, the guys in tantra might be aware of this. If you can make that separation, you can lessen the impact of pain. Pain becomes immaterial. People also say that pain also can be converted into ananda. Sri Aurobindo says it, right? Can be converted into ananda, intense bliss. You can do that, but but because the mind intervenes, you suffer, and that's what death is sort of pointing at. Amusing time with vain discovery, he deepens with thought the mystery of his fate and turns to song his laughter and his tears. And he's saying, how mind works, right? He says, Your fate is already a mystery, but because of the fact that you think about it, you're deepening it even further, as in you're getting entangled even further. There's not an easy answer to the mystery of fate, and turns to song his laughter and his tears. His mortality vexing with the immortal's dreams, troubling his transience with the infinite's breath. They gave him hungers which no food can fill. A beautiful argument that makes. He says they gave you this mind, the mind entered, which is what is making you feel tormented even more, right? Right? And why tormenting? Because your mortality is vexing itself with some immortal dream. The gods have given you that dream, saying, "Oh, you can be deathless, you can be all beautiful." Now, if you didn't have that idea, probably, and if you didn't have a mind, probably you won't suffer, which is more likely because the animal lives content. Even though it experiences pain and suffering, it doesn't rule over it. It experiences fine pain, it'll cry for some time, then it'll forget and it'll move on, right? Now, and troubling his transience with the infinite's breath, they gave him hungers which no food can fill. That line anyone can understand. The human condition has this strange hunger, the hunger for adventure, the hunger for something which is not there. You get it, then it'll want something else, right? Whatever it is, because you couldn't sit around, you go climb Everest. You've climbed Everest. Are you happy with having climbed Everest? Will you stop now? No, I want to climb it 10 times, or I want to climb it 20 times. I want to climb it without oxygen. There's always some convolution it invents because there is that hunger which no food can fill, nothing can fill, right? He is the cattle of the shepherd gods, his body the tether with which he is tied. They cast for fodder grief and hope and joy. He says, man is the cattle of the shepherd gods, his body the tether with which he is tied. Which is true, right? Yeah, you can't move beyond your body. I mean, if you're not a yogi, right? The cast for fodder, grief, hope, and joy. His pasture ground they have fenced with ignorance. To his fragile, undefended breast, they have breathed a courage that is met by death. They have given a wisdom that is mocked by night. They have traced a journey that foresees no goal. Look at what he's saying. He says, you are tied to your body like a cattle. You can't move. And you are fenced by ignorance. Because all that you do, all your life experience is within the boundaries of ignorance. You can't cross it. You haven't crossed it as it, right? With ignorance. And into his fragile, undefended breast. He says, you are uh, feeble. You can be attacked anytime. In your fragile, undefended breast, they have breathed a courage that is met by death. So they give you this courage, but what is your courage being met by? All the courage that you implement in life eventually will come to die, eventually will die, right? And that's the sort of irony or the scorn of the immortals that is being highlighted by death. They have given you a wisdom that is mocked by night. You think you are wise, you're knowledgeable, but night with a capital N, right? Has to throw one wrinkle and your day is doomed, or your life is doomed. You're gone, right? They have traced a journey that foresees no goal. Aimless man toils in an uncertain world, lulled by inconstant pauses of his pain, scourged like a beast by the infinite desire, bound to the chariot of the dreadful gods. Glorious poetry. Aimless man toils in an uncertain world, lulled by inconstant pauses of his pain. Now look at this beauty. He's not saying there is peace and contentment, and then suddenly it's interrupted by pain. No, that's not what Sri Aurobindo is saying. He's saying lulled by inconstant pauses of his pain. So pain is always constant. So that's what death is saying, in Sri Aurobindo's words. Pain is the constant, but pain stops at some time. That's your, presumably pleasurable time or whatever, right? But it's inconstant. You do not know. There is no rhythm to it. There is no pattern to it. You do not know when it comes and when it goes. And that's what sort of lulls you, because you do not know when it will come or when it will go. And that's what death is saying, right? Lulled by inconstant pauses of his pain, scourged like a beast by the infinite desire, human desire. Now you are whipped and lashed by desire. Whether it's the Porsche that crosses the street, or a good-looking man, or a woman, a girl, whatever, right? You look at that and you are scourged, you are whipped by infinite desire, bound to the chariot of the dreadful gods. But if thou still canst hope and still wouldst love, return to thy body's shell, thy tie to earth, and with thy heart's little remnants try to live. Hope not to win back to thee, Satyavan. Yet since thy strength deserves no trivial crown, gifts I can give to soothe thy wounded life. The pacts which transient beings make with fate, and the wayside sweetness earthbound hearts would pluck, these, if thy will accepts, make freely thine. Choose a life's hopes for thy deceiving prize. And look at that glorious argument of death. He says, because you have come this far, as in she has crossed in the night, she has left her body consciously, she has accomplished something, all of that. But he puts his arguments. He says, you are bound to the chariot of dreadful gods. But if thou still canst hope and still wouldst love, he says, if you still want hope, if you want another opportunity at love, he says, return to thy body's shape, thy tight earth. Go back. Go back to that body, and with thy heart's little remnants try to live. As in, he knows that her heart is broken. Satyavan is dead, but somewhere there is still a heart. So he says, go back to that little pittance that is still there. Go back to your body. Go back to whatever is surviving after Satyavan's death of your heart. But hope not to get him back. Forget this guy. Forget Satyavan. But yet, since thy strength deserves no trivial crown. So, see, this is a good enemy, right? A respectful enemy, death. He says, because you have done so much consciously, he says it's not a trivial thing. So he says, I'll give you gifts to soothe your wounded life. Now, here I want to make a observation, right? Now, watch what he says. The pacts which transient beings make with fate, right? Make with fate. Now, this must be very familiar for many of us who undertake pilgrimages, right? Where you say, "Oh God, if you give me X, Y, Z, I will walk and come to your temple. I'll perambulate temple 20 times. I will observe fasting for X number of days." Or the pacts with which transient beings make with fate, and the wayside sweetness earthbound hearts would pluck. I said, wayside sweetness. It's just there, lying on the road. There's some nice things. It's there on the path, en route to something. You have this wayside sweetness, which earthbound hearts would pluck. Not people who have knowledge, not people who have sort of know the immortal's game. They wouldn't stoop to that level. He says it's only this beggars on earth would sort of pluck this desire. So he says, these, if thy will accepts, make freely thine. Choose a life's hopes for thy deceiving prize. Look at that argument. He says, if your will can accept all of these wayside sweetness, he says, take it. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. And he says, whatever your life's hope, right? Husband, children, or wife, this, that. He says, choose a life's hopes for thy deceiving price. That's a bloody deception. Your hope is the deception. But yet, still, if you want, because you have come this far, you sort of deserve it. So he says, ask this, I will give you. Now, I want to draw your attention to something else. And this is exactly what Yama tells Nachiketa. Yama tells Nachiketa, because you have come this far, you have waited for me. He says, I'll give you three boons. Ask me. Right? And I mean, I'm just pointing to that parallels, right? There are 100 different things that are sort of there in Savitri, like this concordances, which you will observe with which you can find with the Vedic experience, life experience, yogic experience. I mean, you take any tantric literature, you will find that concordance. He'll constantly, to the reader who's sort of partly aware, he'll sort of pop in that concordance, saying, this is alluding to that one, and so on. So with that, one second. Yeah, with that, I think I'll stop for today, because that's a nice little pausing point. Savitri is going to Savitri again in another, literally, like, after three or four lines, Savitri responds back. Now remember, all along she's silent, and Death is sort of making these arguments. He's sort of talking to her, right? And now, literally, after three four lines, Savitri begins talking back, talking to Death, starts making her arguments. And like I said, um, to the careful reader, um, careful sadhak, who sort of looks into Savitri and observes, or rather asks himself or herself, why Sri Aurobindo uses a certain phrase, a certain turn of expression, a certain transition and scene. You will see that he very carefully chisels all of these things, right? He chisels it because, from a spiritual, uh, material standpoint, you can take pretty much all of the spiritual literatures of the world. There are very few that honestly document the process, the spiritual process for you. They'll always give you. I mean, for example, I can point to this particular incident. For example, if you read the Purana, the incident of, let's take the incident of Prahalada, right? Prahalada is sort of, he's, his father is basically trying to kill him, right? Saying, because you're not worshipping me, uh, uh, Hiranyakashipu, the Ashura slash Rakshasa, is basically trying to kill. No one tells you Prahalada's viewpoint. And you have this very cliched representation of bhakti, where Prahalada is just closing his eyes I mean, you look at all popular representations, right? Artistic representations, and even you go read the Puranic account, they will not give you the psychological breakdown. What's happening? Is he perceiving anything outside? Is he not perceiving? What state of consciousness are you in? What level of trance? Because as we can see now, there are multiple levels of trance, and no one is giving you that detail. They just they're just rushing through it in aphoristic form. Now you need someone to document it so that at least you know how it would be as a benchmark, as a milestone that you can aspire to, right? Now it's from that standpoint, I think Savitri is unmatched because it documents the process. Everything that you can care to think of, uh, he has documented, of course, in poetic form. So you get sort of best of all the worlds, so to speak. So with that, I'll bring today's session to a pause, please.
Wow, phenomenal, Mahesh, phenomenal. What
Pranam,
glorious
Hemant.
poetry. There were moments where, like you were saying yesterday, this was deeply moving, um, particularly how it speaks to. I mean, especially if you had some experience of it, right? There was a phase when I've kind of sat in front of burning pyres and meditated on that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the things that happen. There are things that happen to the consciousness, and to see Aravindo's words alluding to it, and kind of see that resonance of having had those sparks of experiences.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful,
Absolutely.
glorious, glorious. Oh boy. At this point, I call upon anybody who wants to join the speakers panel and share their thoughts about today's reading. Have any questions for Mahesh? Please do raise your hand, and I'll pull you up. While people are thinking, at one point it reminded me of a sonnet of the master,
Hmm.
and I'm sure you know this, Mahesh. The body.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Um, Aurobindo says, "This body, which was once my universe, is now a pittance carried by the soul. Its Titan's motion bears this scanty purse, pacing through vastness to a vaster goal. Too small was it to meet the great giant need. Too small was it to meet the giant need that only infinitude can satisfy. He keeps it still, for in the folds is hid his secret passport to eternity." Wow. At the end of the day, the body is still the secret passport to eternity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
In his,
And and
yeah,
and
yeah,
and,
sorry.
and that's why there's also that's why you will see in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, and of course, the mothers, voluminous documentation, you will see that Mother and Sri Aurobindo never ask you to do something that makes the body suffer.
Mm,
Never do
mm,
they do it, right?
mm,
For
mm,
example, for example, if you look at, each disciple, of course, mother treats each disciple in a specific fashion, right?
mm,
According to their needs, right? According to their needs. You wouldn't, I'm sure you know this, I mean, you will know this, Hemant, but for others, maybe. There are times where to Sapre, mother gives cheese that has been given to her. She keeps the cheese for him, right?
mm,
She gives him cheese because she knows that he's not taking care of his body, he does not eat properly, and so on. So she gives cheese to Sapre. And there are
mm,
other disciples. There was one who was very weak, so she specifically says, "Go eat 2 eggs." He says, "Go tell in the ashram kitchen that I told,
mm,
and you are given 2 eggs. Go eat properly, right?" And uh, she even takes this to an extreme degree by conventional standards, not to the mother, of course, where she gives money to Satprem saying, "This is for cigarettes, go smoke, go have."
mm, mm,
Right? So you will see that understanding where, because if you look at the traditional, many of the traditional paths, right, they'll
mm,
take great pride in let's say fasting, making the body endure some sort of a discipline. All of these are good, right, to train the will,
mm,
because it's
mm.
basically boils down to training your will. But at end of the day, if the body is the passport to your eternity, then it
Absolutely.
has to be in a functioning order. It has to be robust. It has to be healthy, you
Hmm.
know. And that's the, so when Sri Aurobindo is talking there, you will see that it's not just a sonnet. In all of their principles they followed, not just for themselves, even with the disciples, right? Especially with the disciples, right?
Mm,
They are
mm,
sort of taking care. The body is not to be discarded. It has to be robust. It has to be young, or rather, active, at whatever age. And that's why
yeah.
you will find mother playing tennis when she was what, 60 and all, 50,
Hmm.
60 and all. She's like, running around the tennis ground beating these fellows, right? Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so now.
He goes on to say, in his front and in his front, an endless time and space deploy the landscape of their golden happenings. His heart is filled with sweet and violent joy. His mind is upon great and distant things. How grown with all the world conterminous is the little dweller in this narrow house. How grown with all the world conterminous is this little dweller in this narrow house.
Oh, glorious,
Beautiful,
glorious,
glorious.
glorious. And
Yeah.
this again, to this particular point, there is and this is what we typically miss, right? As we were reading right now, our
Mm,
sense of intimacy, in the conventional mortal sense, intimacy with another person is all about,
mm,
how to possess them, how to hold them, body being close to body, etc.,
mm,
etc. Some fidelity with the idea,
mm,
that's our notion of oneness, of
mm,
love and desire and whatnot. But if you
mm,
look at that passage that we just read out, where Savitri's spirit is sort of enfolding Satyavan's spirit with her
mhm,
infinities, and she's sort of holding him within her, right? So there is a vastly greater intimacy with not just one person, but with all of the world that is possible. And
mhm,
and whatever Master is alluding to is that experience.
mm. No, at the end of the day, that is what it is, right? Intimacy is becoming that oyster shell in which all pearls
Yeah,
reside.
yeah,
Yeah. The,
yeah,
the the other is the pearl held within the one.
yeah,
Yeah. So that
absolutely,
metaphor itself, that pearl in a shell, that is such a beautiful one.
absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. All right. Again, another call. If anybody wants to join the speakers panel and share your views on today's reading, you're welcome. Please raise your hand and I'll pull you up, or we can call it a session and reconvene next week. Rachnaji, you've been very quiet. Care to share some thoughts?
Um, yeah, no, nothing that is coming to mind. Just enjoying listening. I'm waiting for Savitri's response. So let's see how that goes.
Right. Good.
Also, I just want to point out something, Hemant. On the inevitable word handle on Twitter, today's Savitri post uh, speaks of uh, speaks of a passage where the soul sort of comes up from the lower hemisphere. So you can call it either the process of moksha, right,
Hmm.
of,
Hmm.
of cutting out from the lower hemisphere and sort of standing up and becoming the king of existence, so to speak, the Samrat,
Hmm.
spiritual Samrat, right? So Sri Aurobindo is describing that passage. Again, it's a beautiful passage. I highly recommend, people to go read it because it's a sort of another take. Because I think Sri Aurobindo is speaking of Ashwapati's experience there.
Hmm.
And so Ashwapati, like we sort of covered before, is Sri Aurobindo's own what do you say, representation, right, in Savitri. So
Hmm.
he's describing that passage, and slightly longer passage, but it's a glorious passage. Highly recommend, people check out the inevitable word handle, our handle on Twitter, and check the Savitri post for today. It's a nice.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't been very active on Twitter today, so I'll go check it out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good. I think we can we can close the session for today. We are in good
yeah.
time for your getting your filter coffee, Mahesh.
Yes, please.
You don't
This,
need to
this,
rush
this,
today. You can go. You can
no,
walk.
no, absolutely, absolutely, and I can have more than one today.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thank you so much, Mahesh. It's such a privilege actually to be guided through this epic, and for me, it's made some brilliant connections. And this translation work that Sankalpa that had happened, it has taken a very definite um, form now. So I can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Wonderful, wonderful,
So deeply, deeply indebted for that.
and it's sheer grace that both you and I and everyone else are all up to sort of serve the epic and master in some form. So
Absolutely,
pronounce, pronounce.
absolutely. Yeah. All right. So
Yeah,
thank you, Mahesh, and thank you all for joining today. And we will continue with Savitri next Sunday. Looking forward to Savitri's response to Yama, and and we'll see how where it takes us. So thank you all,
thank you all.
and
Good night. Good
good
evening.
night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.